I'm David Hoffman, filmmaker, and you're about to see a film that was made about a journalist going to a small town, Charlottesville, Virginia, in the United States in 1969 to explore people's feelings. And the feelings at that time were intense. This is the time of the Vietnam War. Everybody, it seemed, was talking about it all the time in America. And you were either on one side for the war, again, other side against the war. I mean, the sides were totally divided, totally partisan. Families broke apart because of this issue. People couldn't talk to each other. They were yelling at each other all the time. And this guy goes to this town and tries to find out how people feel. He interviews the newspaper people, like kind of pro-war, and he interviews students, anti-war. Now let's look at these students for a minute before I run the clip. Some of them are trying to avoid the draft. They're protesting the Vietnam War not only because they thought it was wrong, but also because they're trying to avoid the draft. Others, pro-war, actually went to war, and I knew these people. They were friends of mine. They came from military families like I did, and they went to war believing, if my country calls, I go. Those two sides were totally different. And every one of these towns, including Charlottesville in 1969, had people coming back who told you stories of what it was like that didn't sound very good by and large, and also body bags coming back. My town had flags, cemetery, people my age being buried in a war far away that was extraordinarily controversial. So take a look at this scene, and I think you'll get a sense of 1969 in Charlottesville, Virginia. One more thing. What ended this? Well, really what ended it was Kent State. When 4 college students got shot and killed at Kent State, when the National Guard shot them, a lot of this noise calmed down. Yes, there was still a movement to stop the war, and there were pro-war people, but it was a lot different after American students got killed on a college campus. So take a look, 1969, Charlottesville, Virginia.
There's no great discussion in the community, I believe, over the Vietnam War. I would think probably the biggest thing we hear about it is that it's costing us an awful lot of money and taxes are too high.
The Daily Progress editorials by Gilbert Hale have supported the war. Hale believes that Charlottesville does too.
Our newspaper, the Daily Progress, supports the government in its war effort. Our support takes the form of editorials supporting virtually every aspect of the war. We are deeply concerned about the war. We think about it constantly and worry about it and wish that we could do something, but there just isn't a whole lot you can do.
None of the town's leaders attributed any single viewpoint to the town on Vietnam. We were told that most people were apathetic and less directly involved. One classic view of wars argues that old men start them, knowing young men must fight them. Even in this age of conflicts and police actions, young men's lives are still disrupted, sometimes lost. Lane High School, Wednesday morning, Mr. Spidell's class in government and civics.
Janet, you have an article on a rather new movement in America, the hippies.
Well, the hippies are what they call themselves hippies in San Francisco, and there are about 5,000 of them, and they during the week, and then during the weekends, they're joined by teenagers and other groups that just come in, and there are about 20,000 of them then, and they wear wild clothes and long hair, and they have their own philosophy of life.
Lane High School is one of 2 in town, and probably has a slightly higher proportion of upper-middle-class youths than its sister school, Burley. Many of the boys in Mr. Spidell's class are college-bound and probably will not have to face the draft for years, if ever. Nevertheless, Mr. Spidell, who has been teaching for over 30 years, finds these young people more concerned about the issues in this war than their parents ever were. In some, it has created a feeling of profound doubt. In others, profound anger and frustration. The students in this class are encouraged to bring in newspaper articles on any subject that they find interesting. On an average day, the stories range from hippies to hockey players. But according to Mr. Spidell, the subject of Vietnam comes up regularly. Many in the class feel strongly about it.
I might say that the Ramparts magazine for for March has quite an article on the hippies, or 11 pages in color and that type of thing. Now, Scott, you have something in regard to Vietnam, I believe. And we've stayed away from it. That's pretty good for 5 minutes without talking Vietnam. Okay?
Yeah, this was in last Sunday's New York Times. It was, the title was The Vietnam Riddle, and it was all about the different peace probes that have been going on. And I don't know, I underlined several things I thought were kind of interesting. For one, they were talking about all the confusion they have getting people to get together to discuss the peace things, because they get like clergymen and little people really in the lower echelon of the diplomatic service to try to work out places where they can talk and things they can talk about and things. And it seems to me, you know, that this is pretty ridiculous in the age where we have such great communications, where it ought to be done with really high officials, peace, trying to get peace. Then, let me see, well, they started talking about the president and how he felt about the peace talks, and like in all his conferences he says, well, they haven't made any great efforts towards peace, and you know, and he said that we can't stop bombing unless they stop, you know, they stop doing something that they're doing. And I can't really understand, that doesn't really make sense to me, because it's like somebody standing in an alley with a gun and a knife, and another person with a knife, and the guy with the gun saying, well, if you drop your knife, I'll drop my gun. Because the Vietnamese, I don't see as the Viet Cong or the North Vietnamese have anything as deadly as bombing to give up. So I think it's kind of silly. I mean, I think maybe we should promise that if we quit bombing Hanoi, get them to quit bombing Washington or something. I mean, because they're not really, it doesn't really make sense to ask them to give up something that's not very, when they don't have anything as important as bombing. And let's see. And then, you know, on the same line was what the Pope said. You know, what Johnson said to the Pope. He said, well, you can't expect us to quit bombing when they're not going to do anything. That's kind of silly, it seems to me.
I see Scott is wearing a pin I hadn't noticed before. No draft, no war. And you want to comment on this pin?
Well,
The origin of it?
no draft, no war.
No draft, no war. Any comment on Scott's article?
Personally, I'm sick of Vietnam. I'm sick of hearing that. I'm sick of the whole thing. I think U.S. prestige is the most overrated thing in the world. I mean, everybody thinks, you know, what's going to happen if U.S. goes over there, you know, and you know, says a dirty word, drops the pill, and the whole thing. I don't see anything wrong with that. I'm so sick and tired of Vietnam, and I've become just so fed up with the whole thing. Everything that's going on. I very much would like to see the whole of Southeast Asia blown to bits, and all of China. I think, you know, half the world's problems would go down the drain.
Sperry Piedmont is one of several local industries deriving considerable work and profits from military contracts in electronics. But neither management nor the workers admits to feeling any vested interest in the war. Both groups assert that peace would bring a new kind of work and a new kind of profits. The majority questioned expressed support for the war, but many did not. 2 Vietnam veterans revealed the deep split people feel. To Aubrey Higginbottom, his time in Vietnam was a meaningless waste. But service in Vietnam was part of the fight for freedom for Ray Marshall.
I don't understand why there's so much, or so many people fighting this Vietnam issue. To me, it seems like people here would want other people to be as free as we are with, well, in any way of life. We've had these freedoms for years, hundreds of years, and I would like myself to see other people the same way. As far as being in Vietnam, I don't know why, but my reason for being over there was a job. I had a job to do. I was drafted. I pulled my 2 years, and I came back. I was lucky, just one of them, I guess. But for being over there, I don't know why.
The British once built an empire with young men willing to risk death in unknown lands. The United States now has commitments on an imperial scale, and our young men seem willing to accept the same obligation and risk. The willingness to fulfill that commitment was explained by Henry Cooper and Gary Hicks.
Well, I've enlisted in the Navy for 4 years, and I leave for boot camp May the 1st, and I feel that the war in Vietnam is almost a necessity so that I feel we're fighting so we can stop the communists now and stop them while they're small in the countries that they're in now over in Asia, instead of letting them build up and take North Vietnam, and then we can possibly, if we can stop them now, we'll let them know that we mean business and prevent fighting at home later on, maybe in the next few years.
Well, my draft status is 1A, which I may be called at any time in the near future. And I feel that this war is necessary in Vietnam, and that the communists are trying to conquer the world, it seems. And if they are stopped or attempted to stop them in Vietnam, then maybe we can stop them from coming over here in this country, trying to take over. And even if they do conquer Vietnam, then they won't stop at Vietnam. They will still keep going on trying to conquer.
That view of our mission in Vietnam was strikingly similar to the view expressed by these Army reservists. The difference is that these young men will probably never go there. We asked them why we were in Vietnam and why they were in the reserves.
Well, we're in Vietnam